Yeah, so from a patriarchal perspective, she is sort of a perfect wife because she is so loving and so caring. Her husband goes away and she doesn't think, well, he's gone now. I'll just kind of go on with my life, right? So even in his absence, she really longs for him, really is concerned for him, and does whatever she can to care for him, even from a distance. And then, this is a bit of a spoiler, but we've already kind of talked about the story, so it's not that big of a spoiler. She dies, right? And so even beyond the grave, she is caring for her husband and caring for her child, right? So she is this ultimate caring mother on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, she's also kind of this monster, right? I mean, here she is standing on the roof of a temple, scaring the monks. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's a pretty crazy image. And so she is both, right? This kind of good wife, good mother figure, but also this, we could say, even temptress or scary monster figure as well. She murders people, right? So I think that's the power of this story, is it plays with these ambiguities, right? There are a lot of stories where they're the goody-goody, good characters and the baddie bad characters, and the good defeats the evil, and that's boring, right? We've seen that so many times. Here, good and evil are very much mixed up, right? And you can really feel for her and understand why she does what she's doing, but at the same time feel kind of revulsion too at what she's doing. So I think it's the sign of a good story. And yeah, and another thing is, you can think about these monks and wizards and adepts, right? This is something I've been pushing a little bit for the last few weeks, is thinking about who are the figures in Buddhism. It's not just lay people and monks, although monks are a character here. We've got this village monk, sort of like a scholar kind of figure. But then this wizard shows up. He's the guy with the long hair who's not wearing robes and who messes with her grave. That's when things get a little gory, a little graphic. So he's a wizard. He's an exorcist. Oh, and on the topic of gore, if you don't like this kind of movie and you don't want to watch it, but you do want to do extra credit, we can come up with something else too. I could give you a different movie to watch. So send me an email if you don't like horror movies and you don't want to do this, but you do want to do extra credit. We can come up with an alternative assignment. So anyways, but there's sort of a wizard type figure who shows up. And then there's this adept who, in a way, he's similar to both. He's a monk, he's monastic, but on the other hand, he has some pretty special powers. And so one thing we'll think about today is, who is the adept and how do you become an adept? That's kind of the next topic we're going to turn to. There's a scene we could look at, but why don't we not even look at it? We've already lost a lot of time today. So any questions about this? Extra credit, knock, anything like that? Can we lay her to rest, so to speak? All right, let's lay her to rest. So turning now to spiritual friends, I'm going to wash my head here. We had, it's not a short reading. It was, like 30 pages or something? Yeah, almost exactly 30 pages. So it's a little intense. It was a translation from a book called The Words of My Perfect Teacher, is what I assigned for today. It's a Tibetan book, but it's not the ancient book of spells we were looking at. This is a much more, dare I say, modern. It's not really modern, but it's more recent, let's just say. The author is right here, Patrul Rinpoche. I forget exactly the page range I gave you. I might have given you like a ton of stuff, but I didn't ask you to read all of it. Some of it's just sort of the table of contents, whatever. But here's our author. He's this guy here, Patrul Rinpoche. As you can see, his dates here are 1808 to 1887. So, what happened in that time range? I think about American history. What's happening in America during this guy's life, 1808 to 1887? What's a big event that changed America? Yes, exactly. All that good stuff. And so obviously maybe this isn't obvious, but he's not American, right? He wasn't in America, but that's the time period we're talking about, right? America existed during this guy's life. And so it's a much more recent book. It's more, we could say, scholarly, right? There's sort of an organization of scholarly topics that he is exploring. We could call it a treatise. That's a very special scholastic word, but it's basically a commentary on other Buddhist things that he composed. And he is himself kind of a famous Buddhist master. So when you read this, you can think these are teachings from a celebrated Tibetan Buddhist monk. what else to say about this? Maybe that's enough for now. Oh, well, of course, it's translated from Tibetan into English. Again, the book is called Words of My Perfect Teacher. It's a great book. We're just reading little parts of it, but I think it'll give us a nice glimpse into what, again, what this idea of being an adept is all about, and what is the path, right? We've talked about the Eightfold Path before. Remember that? That's sort of this early path to enlightenment. Here we have kind of a new path now. We have these new goals of achieving attainments or accomplishments. In the reading, they're called accomplishments. I kind of like attainment better. I feel like accomplishment feels like, I don't know, more like, you know, what you gain in your job or something like that. The Sanskrit word is siddhi. Some people just write siddhi in English, and that's why I'm giving this to you now. You might not know that term, but the Sanskrit word for adept, maybe I'll even add this here, this is something we've also seen in the reading, is siddha. So they're related words. You know, when I say adept, that's kind of a weird English word that you usually don't hear, right? You've never heard that word before. And one reason I'm using it is because it's a translation of a Sanskrit word, siddha. So these are both related terms. So what is a siddha? Is someone who has these attainments, who has these siddhi. So to tie it into previous things we've talked about, scholars rely on books, right? On scriptures, on Buddhist texts, that sort of thing. They write treatises, kind of like what we are reading for today. Wizards have their spells. They might also be in books, but it's a different kind of book, right? They have their ritual instructions, like what we read before. Remember that? The Buddhist book of spells, the Tibetan book of spells. They rely on deities and all that sort of stuff. Adepts are a little bit different. They rely on, we could say, meditation. That's one thing we'll think about today. And then the attainments that come from that meditation, right? So it's not just like reading a spell like in Harry Potter or something like that, where if you know the magic words, then you can change the world. This is, you have to develop something, right? You have to cultivate this attainment. Some other words I can introduce to you. In order to get these attainments, you need a teacher, which is called a guru. Have you heard of gurus before? That's kind of cool. You've heard of gurus? Of course you have, right? How do people use that word in English? Guru. Where have you heard that before?
Love gurus.
Did you say wealth?
No, I said love.
Oh, love gurus. Okay, what is a love guru?
Isn't it like, well, I don't know. Isn't it like just helping you, I don't know, not find, but to help you find what you're looking for? I'm not sure exactly.
Okay, have you guys heard of love gurus? I'm not sure I know that term. Maybe that's a thing. Is that a thing? I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it's also a movie with Michael Myers.
Oh, is it? Oh, actually,
He's he's a sage kind of guy.
Yeah, the love guru. I have heard of that. And as you can tell, even though it's pretty recent, 2008, it feels a little brown facey, doesn't it? Right? He's got this sort of Indian garland around his throat, his neck and stuff. And is that really Michael Myers? He looks kind of, yeah, it is him. Okay, very interesting. Anyways, yeah, the love guru. Okay, so that's a movie. So what is a guru? As you could tell from that sort of cheesy looking movie, it's usually an Indian spiritual teacher of some kind, and we often keep sort of love and spirituality separate in our country. So maybe that's why that movie became a movie, by combining those things together. Might be sort of interesting. Maybe you heard of like tech gurus. Is that a thing you've heard of before? Tech guru. There are lots of different gurus, right? Where they can help you, give you advice in some capacity. It's almost like a coach or something, right? You guys ever think of different life coaches and that sort of thing? They're almost like gurus too. Yeah. Yeah, so it's worth thinking about. How do we use this word? Because I think there are subtle implications for what it means for us. But in any case, it comes from the Sanskrit word for a spiritual teacher, right? So this is a religious teacher. The Tibetan word is lama. So maybe you've heard of the Dalai Lama. This is the same word. There are a lot of Tibetan words that translate Sanskrit words that go pretty directly. Although if you look at the etymology of the two words, they're actually very different. I won't bore you with those details, but they translate each other, and they both effectively mean spiritual teacher. So the Dalai Lama is not his name, of course, that's his position. He's the 14th Dalai Lama. He was born in 1935. And so he is a guru as well, right? Now, this chapter we read for today is how to follow a spiritual friend. So that's yet another term that is sort of synonymous with guru, this idea of a spiritual friend. And I like this term. Actually, I think I have a slide for it. Yeah. Kalyanamitra Shebnyan. And so what is that? That is, again, it's a teacher for someone who's on a spiritual path. I like this idea of the teacher being a friend, right? And it kind of begs the question, what is the difference between a teacher and a friend? And maybe some of your teachers are friends. And so maybe your relationship with a teacher is a friendly one. So how do you follow a spiritual friend? The advice we get in this chapter is three things. One, the first, we need to examine the teacher. Then we follow them if we determine them to be good, and then emulate them. I saw some of you were taking notes on this slide, so I'll open up again. So maybe these are things, yeah, I can get you guys to think about. So I'm going to ask you to discuss these questions in a moment. The main question I want you to think about is, who are your teachers, right? Who are the teachers or mentors or people who have sort of influenced you in your life? As you can tell, I'm using the word influencer somewhat creatively here, but it's on purpose, right? Because I think when we try to think about who are we and how do we become the way we are, who has influenced us in our lives, social media is part of that. It's maybe not like the main part, but it is there. It's in the background somewhere. And as you think about who are the teachers in your life, I want you to think, what makes somebody a good teacher, right? A lot of this chapter is built around finding a good teacher, knowing how to identify a good teacher. And so it's an important question, right? In a way, you guys don't get to choose your teachers. Maybe that's overstated, right? If you already knew who I was, for example, you could look through the course listing and say, oh, I like this teacher. Maybe I want to take a class with him or her. But for others, it would be less about the teacher and more about the subject matter, or even about the schedule. It's like, okay, yeah, this fits into my schedule very nicely, right? So here, what I want you to think about is, what do you look for in a teacher? It could be a teacher in school, right? So what do you look for in a teacher in your classes, or in other areas of your life? So perhaps in sports. This is one that comes to mind a lot, right? We compared the guru to a coach, but even in professional pursuits, I know that it might be a little bit early for you guys to be thinking about those. Other extracurricular activities, right? Maybe in music, or in art, or in some other capacity, right? We actually have lots of different teachers and coaches and mentors in our lives. And I want you to think about who they are and what makes them good at what they do, right? And then you could also think, what makes somebody kind of bad, right? What are the qualities of a bad teacher, right? An undesirable teacher. Yeah. So this is an important point. Yeah, family is interesting. I kind of want to steer you away from family, because one thing that's different between a family member and a teacher is you can choose your teacher, right? Family members, unfortunately or fortunately, we cannot choose, right? We're just sort of stuck with it. But maybe if you do want to talk about family, and again, that's fine, because when you see this question, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, my parents, my siblings, whatever. Maybe you can think more about the qualities then, right? So what qualities have they taught you, and what qualities in them, do you find desirable in a teacher, or maybe undesirable, right? If you want to get real personal. And then finally, you can tie it in with the reading. That's a bit more optional than usual today. I'm not going to make you excavate the reading, but let's talk about this. It's pretty open-ended. If you think it's interesting, we can run with it for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. If you don't think it's interesting, then we can just do it real quick. I'll take attendance and we'll jump right back. So here are the questions for you. The main question is, who are your teachers, right? And what makes somebody a good teacher? So let me set up the breakout rooms. If you guys in person want to do a super group, all right, we're back, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. So sorry to cut off conversation. We were actually having a great conversation in our breakout room too. So this was nice. Again, it's pretty wide open, right? Just who are your teachers and what makes somebody a good teacher. But actually, it turns out there's a lot to say about this topic, right? Or at least it seems like you guys were having good conversation too. Maybe just because I always pick on all of you, maybe I'll see if anybody in the chat wants to talk. Does anybody want to talk about teachers, mentors, influencers, or you can even go more abstract and think about the qualities of teachers?
In my group, we talked about like how we thought from the reading, we saw one part that said like good influencers or good teachers should be compassionate. So I thought that was really important, like caring about the greater good and not being selfish. So, and then when we follow those people, it's important not to fixate on them completely. Like you should still be true to yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, and so we'll see that in a moment. And maybe I can follow up by asking what's wrong with a selfish teacher? Why is a selfish teacher so undesirable?
Well, we thought that they were only looking out for themselves and not other people, so therefore they couldn't be the best teacher.
Yeah, it's almost like, oh, there's a bird. It's almost like teaching requires a bit of empathy, right? You have to care about other people in order to teach, because if you don't care about other people, then you're sort of only in your own head, right? Then it's like, okay, you guys, we're all in the same room together, but I don't care about you and I don't care about what you learn. I just care about me. And, hit 9 o'clock, I'm out of here. I'm going back to my office and getting back to whatever I'm going to do. Have you guys ever had teachers like that? Unfortunately, they're actually kind of common, right? Especially, I hate to say it, as you get higher up in education, I'm a professor now. There's a lot of pressure on me to like write books and articles and stuff like that. A lot of people are just like, yeah, teaching, whatever. I'm going to focus on my articles and then just, do the bare minimum. And in fact, again, I hate to say it, that's sort of how college is designed, right? Because there's an infinite amount of research I could do, and there's a finite amount of teaching. And so if I keep my teaching effort as small as possible, then I can do more research, right? But again, just like Catherine's saying, what prevents me from just totally phoning it in this class, right, is I care about you guys, right? Or at least I try to. It's something I happen to agree with. It's like compassion is important. Excellent. Thank you for that. Other thoughts, other anecdotes? People in the room, what do you guys talk about here? Yeah.
Education is a lifelong process.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what we're doing, we're always going to be students in some way. There's situations where we teachers, there's situations where we students.
Mm.
And if you approach life in that kind of way, where you are a student, you're learning every single day,
Mm-hmm.
you're way less likely to think you know everything and be arrogant.
Wonderful. Okay, so if you guys couldn't hear him, Brendan was talking about how you can be a teacher in some circumstances, you can be a student in other circumstances, right? I can use myself as an example. I'm a teacher here, right? But I'm not always a teacher. I know maybe this is hard for you to believe. There are times when I am foolish and make mistakes and I need to learn things, right? And so very nicely stated, Brendan was saying there's sort of a humility that's required, right? As opposed to the arrogance of always sort of knowing what's going on. Really what this chapter is all about is how to develop that humility. It's not even something that naturally falls from the sky. There are things you can do to be more open to learning, right? And again, the opposite would be, I am so smart, I am so educated, there's nothing else for me to learn, I've already got it all figured out, right? So that's an excellent point. When we think about this question, how should we follow a teacher, right? Once we, is somebody trying to come in? Okay, well, if they knock, maybe I can say hi real quick. There it is down. Okay. Hello. Hi sorry, do you have a class? At 9:20. Okay, so our room was locked, and so we were refugees and came here, but we'll be done in 15 minutes. Okay. Do you? Okay, we're finished at 9 o'clock. Is that okay? All right, yeah, sorry to be bothered. Okay. So, there you go. All right. Okay, so coming back here, how much time do we have? Yeah, we have 15 minutes. So why don't we use the rest of our precious time in this room to go through Pacharinpoche stuff. So Catherine got us started with this idea of compassion, and perhaps predictably, Pacharinpoche makes a very similar kind of statement. The language he uses is different, but it's effectively what we were just talking about. It's this idea of bodhicitta. Now, you might not remember this because I think we kind of glossed over quickly. We have seen this term before. I didn't want to overburden you with terms that have bodhi at the beginning. We've seen bodhisattva. Remember bodhisattvas, right? And we had that sort of ladder going up the ladder. Remember that thing? I drew it on the board. You got the low level bodhisattva. You got the high level bodhisattva, the bodhisattva who's almost a Buddha. And maybe I can ask this too by way of review. How do you become a bodhisattva? Let's say I want to be a bodhisattva. What do I have to do? What's that first step that makes somebody a bodhisattva? Take a vow, right? And so what is the vow? It's this. It's basically saying, I want to achieve awakening for the sake of all sentient beings, right? That's what makes someone a bodhisattva. So these are very related terms, right? Bodhisattva is an enlightenment being. It's a being on the path to enlightenment. Here we've got bodhicitta. It's the mind of enlightenment, right? It's the spirit of awakening. Chitta literally means mind. This is a little more of a creative translation, but I think it's also pretty nice. The spirit of awakening, right? It's making this commitment, this vow, this determination that I will achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And it's not something that people take lightly, right? This is, again, if you went through this carefully, you'll see this is like a really extreme form of dedication that people develop. And Pacharinpoche breaks it down. He says, a teacher could be condensed to one question. Does this teacher have bodhicitta? Do they care about other beings, right? Have they dedicated their lives to the sake of other beings? And if the answer is yes, they will be a good teacher. If the answer is no, they might not be. Not necessarily a bad one, but they might not be a good teacher. There are a bunch of kind of interesting little stories about bad teachers. And Sidra made some really nice comments about, well, maybe, we need to think about what makes a bad teacher. Maybe the term bad teacher is inappropriate. Maybe it's just kind of like a fit, right? What might work for some students might not work for other students. And I like that approach. Pacharinpoche is a little more condemning. He says there are bad teachers. And what makes somebody a bad teacher? Well, let me tell you. And he says some teachers are blind in the sense that they don't know the material, right? It's like blind leading the blind. There are what he calls mad guides, right? So people who behave as, though of lower mentality than ordinary people, they ape the siddhas, right? Those adepts, and behave as if their actions were higher than the sky. So people who pretend like they're these great teachers, but they don't actually know what they're talking about. The story of the frog in the well is sort of an interesting one, where it's basically, let's say I'm a little frog who lives in my little well, and some frog from the ocean comes by, and I'm like, hey, I hear you from the ocean. How big is that ocean? Is that like half the size of my well, or maybe a quarter the size of my well? And of course, the ocean is much bigger than my well. And so it's kind of a minor point, but it's illustrating, I think that my little world of knowledge is so big and vast and so all-encompassing. Kind of like what Brendan was saying a moment ago, there's an arrogance that can come with it, right? I have a PhD. I have read all these books. I know everything about everything, right? And so all of a sudden I become closed off to actually learning more, right? And seeing the ocean for what it is. And then when the frog ultimately does see it, he faints, his head splits apart, and he dies. So a lot of funny little stories throughout the reading for today. So those are all guides that we might want to abandon. And again, what are we doing here? We're examining, right? We're examining a teacher and thinking about what is a good teacher, what is a bad teacher. Once you examine a teacher properly and decide that they are good, then there are stories about how to follow them. This is just a warning that this is important, right? Not to examine the teacher is like drinking poison. Dang, right? Not to examine teachers like drinking poison. Not to examine a disciple is like leaping from a precipice. Do I get to examine you guys? Not really, right? There's no ratemystudents.com. I kind of wish there were. I could rate you guys and say how great you all are, right? No, but there is a mechanism for rating you, right? For examining you. It's just I don't do it personally. Who does it? It's the admissions office, right? There is a whole structure for vetting you and making sure you're good students. I just don't have to do it. And you guys also don't have to personally vet me because you also have a middleman vetting me and making sure I'm a good teacher, which again is Manhattan College. And in a way, that's sort of exactly what a college is, right? We could cut out the middleman and I could start my own class, right? I could go on YouTube or something and try to get a bunch of followers and sponsorship or whatever. But I kind of like having Manhattan College take care of me as the middleman. So anyways, the importance of examining the teacher. Hopefully this is clear now. And it'll become more clear, is that this is a very intimate, a very important relationship, and it's taken very seriously in this tradition. And in many ways, this is the path to enlightenment, right? Is finding the right teacher and following them in the right way. There are actually three stories we could go through today. We don't have time to go through all three. We could try to get through two, maybe if we go through quickly. So one is, well, they get progressively more, let's say, relatable, to use a term that's sort of hard to define. The first one is very mythological almost. Do I have the page numbers? Yeah, so Sada Prarodita, I know that's kind of a mouthful. This is, we could say, an Indian myth. It comes from Buddhist scriptures. It's a very old story. It starts on 153. Then we get the story of Naropa and his teacher Tilopa. I know those are kind of similar sounding names, so I apologize if that confuses you, but we'll go through them, and that's also another short story. And then we'll save Milarepa for next time, because actually the reading for next class is a little more straightforward. It's still relatively long. It's about the same length, I think, maybe. Yeah, not quite the same length, maybe 20 pages. But yeah, we'll go through it a bit more quickly. The Milarepa story is a really good one, and so we'll spend more time on that next time. So let's try to get through Sada Prarodita today, and then maybe Naropa too, if we have time for it. So if you are following along at home, we can turn to 153. And now we have these stories about how to follow a teacher. It starts at the very bottom of 153. Again, Sada Prarodita. And the name means ever weeping in Tibetan, Dr. Ngu. And there's this teacher, a bodhisattva named Dharmodgata. You don't have to know his name, we'll just call him the teacher. But Sada Prarodita really wants to study with this teacher. What does he want to study? The transcendent wisdom, or the perfection of wisdom. Did I write this for you? Yeah, the perfection of wisdom. The book, and I apologize for all the Sanskrit that shows up in the book. That's just what some translators do. They keep calling it Prajna Paramita, but this is all that it means, is the perfection of wisdom. Do you remember the 6 perfections that we learned long ago? Maybe you don't remember the 6 perfections, but if we think about the path of the bodhisattva, right, progressing from lower stages to higher stages, this is how you progress, is you learn the various perfections, one of which is the perfection of wisdom. It's the other thing I drew on the board for you, where you kind of take things apart and put them back together again, right? Playing with your conceptions of the world, recognizing that your senses do not represent reality as it truly exists. That is also the perfection of wisdom. And that is what Sada Prarodita wants so bad. He wants it so bad that he is willing to kind of do anything for it. He gets a little vision of this teacher teaching, and he's like, oh my God, this is so interesting. I just want it so bad. And he thinks, I don't have anything to offer to him. Because again, he can't pay his tuition, so to speak. There are no loans that he can take out. And so he's thinking, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sell the flesh of my own body, on 155 at the top. I shall sell the flesh of my own body, and with the money I receive for it, I will honor the Bodhisattva Dharmodgata. So basically he's saying, I'm going to make an offering to this teacher with the flesh of my own body. Reasonable, right? No, it's not reasonable. And so that's why this is kind of we could call it a myth, right? It feels a little ridiculous. Just to be clear, it's not the only story that makes this move, this idea of using your flesh to honor somebody or to buy something. It actually shows up in a lot of different Buddhist scriptures. I couldn't tell you exactly why. I think it forces you to rethink your own flesh, right? Like, what is this body of mine? Is it really so bad if I cut out a chunk and give it to somebody? There are stories of young, healthy people feeding their own flesh to old, sick people as sort of an offering of, I don't know, compassion or filial piety, we could say. So again, it's not a unique story actually, but it might feel a little bit weird if you've never seen something like this before. And frankly, even if you have, it's still pretty weird. So Indra shows up. He's one of the gods. Remember Indra? Indra shows up. He's like, "Oh, I hear you want to sell your flesh. I'll take some flesh." And so he's sort of trying him out, right? Again, if the gods are showing up, we have sort of a interesting mythological story here. And he says, "Okay, I'll buy some of your flesh." And he cuts out a chunk of his flesh. He gives it to Indra. All the while, this nice merchant's daughter is sort of following along and listens. And eventually, Indra's very impressed, and he's like, "All right, I'll make you back to normal again." And this is sort of an interesting moment. On 156, he's like, "No, I shall invoke the blessings of the truth. By the blessings of the Buddha's prediction that I will never return into samsara," which is cyclical existence, of course. "By the truth of my supreme and unshakable determination, by the truth of my words, may my body resume its former state." So we have this moment of truth. Maybe you remember from Angulimala, this is a bit of a reach, but he also made a similar statement where blessings come from the truth, right? He said that he hasn't killed anybody since he took this vow of nonviolence. So we see something similar here. By the truth of his determination, there are blessings that are being promised. And of course, he eventually does get the teachings. And so, you know, one takeaway, it's worth thinking, what is the moral of this story and kind of how does it make you feel? We don't even learn what the teaching is, right? I had to tell you, it's this perfection of wisdom. All we get is sort of the motivation of this person who wants it so very badly, right? And to me, that kind of is the moral of the story, the point of the story, is to show these teachings matter, right? They matter so much that a guy is willing to remove his own flesh and give it to somebody so he can make an offering to pay the tuition, right? They didn't quite put it that way, but to make an offering to the teacher so he can learn this teaching, right? So if this guy is willing to go through that, right, to get rid of his own flesh, to cut his own flesh in order to learn this teaching, well, I guess I could do a little reading before class, right? That's not asking too much, is it? And so it's almost a theme that we see across many of these stories, right? We have these figures who are willing to give so much to just get these teachings, right? And I would argue the point is to really inspire you, right? Inspire the reader in order that they might study a little more intensively and gain that passion, right? That excitement for what is being taught here. Questions or thoughts about this? I know I went through it very quickly, but we only have a few minutes at the end of class here. So again, where are we in our 3-step plan? This is the follow part, right? We are learning to follow a teacher after examining the teacher and learning that they're really good. Here we get advice for how to follow them is by making these offerings and making this great effort to learn the teachings. We got 5 minutes. We can get started on this last one. So this is another story. 2 new characters for you. One is named Naropa. Here's a picture of him. Even though I call him a scholar, here he probably doesn't look much like a scholar. He's mostly naked. He's sitting on animal skin. This band that's around his knee is like a meditation band. So if you meditate for like weeks at a time and your body starts to get sort of, I don't know, unable to keep the posture, there are these bands that people use in order to keep the posture. I personally have never used one, so I couldn't tell you exactly how they work, but that's what that is. Here's a goddess, Vajrayogini. We'll see her tomorrow. And so he initially is this high caste. If you ever taken 110 class, maybe you learn about the caste system in India. If you take it with me, then you would have learned about it. A high caste Indian scholar, right? Again, just like me, wearing his scholarly clothes, coming to class, that sort of thing. And then his teacher, and again, Naropa is the student, Tilopa is the teacher. His teacher is low caste. So it's almost like a criticism of this caste system, is a low caste Indian beggar, but he's also an adept, right? So it'd be like you guys, if you wanted to learn about Buddhism, you'd be like, I don't want to learn about it from this scholar fool. I'm going to go to like that beggar next to the train station and ask him, what the nature of reality is. And that's basically what this story is about. It's, someone like me, the scholarly type, the institutionally supported type, going out and finding some beggar person and asking them for teaching. So again, it's supposed to sort of flip things on their head a little bit, because socially speaking, that's exactly what it is doing. And in flipping it this way, right, what we are being asked to do is kind of purify our perception. This might be kind of a weird term, but it's an important one. Pure perception. So what does this mean? Is to see the teacher as perfect, right? So for example, I'll show you a picture of Tilopa. He looks, again, he's also kind of naked, sitting on animal robes and stuff. He's eating raw fish out of a bucket, right? If you encountered somebody eating raw fish out of a bucket, you probably would not think, oh, this must be a very enlightened person. I'm going to go learn from them, right? You would think, again, what you might think when you encounter a beggar outside the train station is like, I'm going to kind of stay away from this person. He's sort of scary. But when Naropa tries to see him with pure perception, he realizes that Tilopa is blessing each one of these fish and sending them off to heaven or something like that. So it's playing with this idea of what you see is not necessarily how things truly are. And the same could be said for the caste system, right? I think this is actually a social cause we could all agree with, right? Or at least the more, politically liberal folks would agree with, is that, class does not define people, caste does not define people. We're all people, we all have value. And so this idea of pure perception is asking you to reconsider the things that you see, right? And that gets pretty extreme in this story, in a way, sort of like Sadaprabhadita. Tilopa effectively tortures his student. They go up on top of a rooftop, and Tilopa's like, hey, is anyone willing to leap off of this building in order to obey his master? And of course, Naropa's like, yeah, sure. And he jumps off the roof on 157, onto the next page. He's like, well, it's not just the pain. I'm not much more than a corpse. But Tilopa blessed him, and his body was completely healed. Tilopa led Naropa off again. And it goes on and on like this. We're basically out of time now, so maybe I'll cut things off here. But there's a series of stories where Tilopa forces his student, just like Sadaprabhadita, to go through these very painful experiences, but blesses him, and they kind of move along. And so it's a type of teaching that is very uncomfortable to encounter. And if you're thinking, I don't really want to get involved with this sort of tradition, I encourage you to think that, right? Because in fact, stories like this, they can lead to very, let's say, horrible instances of abuse and other bad things. So I encourage you to sort of see with two minds here, right? On the one hand, this could be a very dangerous way to go. And of course, the tradition itself says it is very dangerous, right? It calls itself this dangerous esoteric tradition. On the other hand, I think there is something valuable here, and that's something we can get at next time. But what is the goal, right? What is the goal of this pure perception stuff? We can perhaps easily see a downside, but what might an upside be? And maybe we can leave that as an open question for now. So we're out of time. Other dude needs to use the room, so we should get out of here. Any last questions before we go? We all good? So we'll see each other tomorrow. I know it's kind of weird to say, but we have class at